Welcome to the start of a new week here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Moving through the month of July, we enter this is technically the third full week of July. I mean, we're moving through. We're only a week or so away from the start of training camp. Probably looking at about, today's the 14th, probably a little more than 2 weeks away until the start of training camp. They'll kick things off with media day and move into practices and then grind through that through all of August until we arrive at the start of the football season in September. And so we're working through these next couple weeks to get up to training camp, of course, getting you ready for everything as far as the Pitt football team goes in 2025. We're doing our football position previews on Panther-Lair.com. Every week is a different position. This week, Jim's got the cornerbacks. Last week, we wrote a lot about the linebackers, and coming up with the top 5 linebackers in the Narduzzi era was certainly interesting. Might have to do a Morning Pitt about that this week. But overall, we're just grinding through all the position previews, getting you ready for the season. And there's a little benchmarks along the way, little points where you notice, we're getting closer. You get these watch lists or preseason All-Americans or preseason All-Conference lists. These little things that you tick off and you're like, oh, okay, there's that. Now we're getting closer. We're getting closer. We're getting closer. And one of those, benchmarks, one of those mileposts along the way is the conference media day. The ACC Football Kickoff will be next week. I want to say it's like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Today's the 14th, 15th. So yeah, I think it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Pitt will have its representative speak on Wednesday, and it was announced last week, actually. We didn't get a chance to talk about it. Which Pitt players will be representing the University of Pittsburgh football program at the ACC Football Kickoff next week in Charlotte. And at the risk of reading too much into it, we're going to read too much into it because I think there's some interesting little there's one glaring omission that stands out that, wow, this guy's not part of it. And what does it mean? And are we reading too much into it if we think too much about it? And maybe we should think too much about it. And what is it all, what by extension or implication, what should we sort of read into the absence of one player in particular, which I think who we're talking about. But we won't just, dabble in conspiracy theories today. We'll get into some other conversation as well as far as media day and who should be the face of this Pitt football program for the 2025 season. Some years are more obvious than others. I think this is one of those obvious years where there's some very clear faces of the program beyond the head coach, but players and how important that is and whether those players can get the city of Pittsburgh to resonate. All those sort of offshoots of interesting conversations about sort of program representation. And I think the ACC Football Kickoff serves as at least one indicator of what the program representation looks like. So does it matter who they send to the ACC Media Days? Let's answer that question and a few others here on the Morning Pitt Monday edition, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Monday in the Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Hope you had a great weekend. Did lots of fun things. It was mostly nice weather until last night a little bit. But either way, nice hot weekend in the Berg, and hopefully you enjoyed it to its fullest extent. And hopefully you stayed tuned to Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt sports news. The website Panther-Lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting, transfers, media day, all those different things. Conspiracy theories, we've got it all at Panther-Lair.com and a lot more with our coverage of Pitt football, Pitt basketball, and everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. And, of course, the message boards where you can hang out with other Pitt fans and talk about Pitt sports. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com talking about Pitt sports, and you can join that conversation as well. And then, of course, our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's a place to get all of the Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, a little bit of Pitt sports talk to get your day started. We have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Some nights we move it back to 8:45. I think that might be the case this week, but I have to figure that schedule out. I'll let you know, though, for sure. We have press conferences and post-game shows and interviews and all kinds of fun stuff, all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe. And that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So the Pitt's attendees, Pitt's representatives at the ACC Football Kickoff next week, colloquially known as ACC Media Days in Charlotte. University of Pittsburgh football program will be represented, in addition to head coach Pat Narduzzi, of course, senior running back Desmond Reed, senior offensive lineman Lyndon Cooper, senior safety Javon McIntyre, and redshirt junior linebacker Kyle Lewis. Those are your 4 representatives at ACC Media Day. And this was announced, I think, on Wednesday, and we didn't really get a chance to talk about it. We had other stuff we wanted to talk about on Thursday, and we had the mailbag on Friday, so figured we'd save this topic. We'd get to it at some point. And inevitably, I think, certainly the first thing that caught my eye, and I think probably caught a lot of people's eyes, was the absence of one name, as in the returning starting quarterback, as in Eli Holstein, not going to Charlotte, not going to be part of the ACC Media Day. And look, I'll probably say this like 25 times over the course of the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes, however long we hang out here this morning. But I don't want to overthink this. I don't want to read too much into it. I just want to take the information we have at hand and draw whatever conclusions we feel like we need to draw out of that information. And because Pat Narduzzi didn't call me up and tell me why Eli Holstein's not going to ACC Media Day, I don't have any background information on it whatsoever, because that's not what we're here to do on the Morning Pit. We're just here to talk about things. And I don't think I was alone in noticing Holstein's absence or taking note of Holstein's absence or feeling like that was maybe the most interesting thing to come out of that announcement, that Eli Holstein's not there. But a few things. One, he is an underclassman. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's a third-year player. And shout out to, who was it on the message boards? Let me find it. Shout out to ZAZ Duger 60, who went back through 2017 to look at who represented Pitt at ACC Media Day. And it was almost never someone that young, like a third-year player. The youngest player, the youngest player, the youngest underclassman to represent Pitt at ACC Media Day was 2021 when Jordan Addison went ahead of his sophomore season. Everybody else, seniors, juniors, redshirt seniors, all of it. So you have that, and I think you take that into consideration. Eli Holstein's going to be a redshirt sophomore. He's going to be a third-year player. But he's also a returning starter at quarterback. And even though he didn't start the final few games and only, he obviously started the first 7, started the first 8, and then, missed some games and ultimately only played in 10 games, but he started all 10 of those games. I mean, he's the returning starter at quarterback. He was the QB1 in spring camp, and we'll get into spring camp in a second, but he is the returning starter at quarterback. And pretty much anybody else in the ACC who had a starting quarterback coming back is taking that starting quarterback to the ACC Media Days. Like, I looked through all 17 teams. Out of the 17 teams in the ACC, there are only 4 that are not taking a quarterback to Media Day. Stanford, Wake Forest, Boston College, and Pitt. Stanford's starter last year transferred to Auburn. Wake Forest's starter, Hank Bachmeier, graduated, and Boston College's starter, Tommy Castellanos, transferred to Florida State. So they didn't have a returning starter at quarterback, and they're not taking a quarterback to the ACC Media Day. Everybody else who had a returning starter is taking their quarterback to Media Day. There are 8 teams in the conference who actually don't have a returning starter or quarterback, but they brought in a transfer quarterback, and that transfer is going to ACC Media Day. UNC brought in a transfer from South Alabama. He's going to Media Day. Duke, Syracuse, Louisville, Florida State, Virginia, Miami, all taking transfer quarterbacks who just arrived on campus in January to ACC Media Day. So they're not even returning starters, but they are apparently deemed the starting quarterback. Cal, God love him, Cal, is taking 2 quarterbacks, both of whom transferred in. A kid who transferred from Ohio State and a kid who transferred from Oregon. They are going to ACC Media Day. But Pitt's returning starter at quarterback is not. There are a few things I wonder about. One, I wonder why he's not going. 2, you can't. It's hard for me to think about this situation without applying the context of last year when Pitt took Nate Yarnell to ACC Media Day because he came out of spring camp as the QB1. He was anointed the QB1 throughout the summer and even at the beginning of training camp. Nate Yarnell went to Media Day last year, the ACC Football Kickoff last year, as a redshirt junior. So he's 1 year older than Eli Holstein, 1 year further into his college career. He's fourth-year player. Holstein this year is only a third-year player. But they took Nate Yarnell despite only having like 3 career starts. Now, he did effectively end the 2023 season as the starting quarterback. But we all know how that worked out. That's minimal amount of starting experience. Certainly not what Eli Holstein had. Holstein would have been a 13-game starter if he had stayed healthy. He only started 10 games. The only reason he started just 10 games instead of 13 is that he got hurt. And there was no public acknowledgement of his job being in any kind of jeopardy this spring or this summer. And so it's curious that he wasn't taken along. And you could say it was the age thing. Well, Narduzzi just only wants to take those upperclassmen. You could say that maybe, I don't want to say Narduzzi learned a lesson from last year, because I don't think those two situations are really analogous, because, again, Nate Yarnell only had a couple of starts under his belt, whereas Holstein is pretty entrenched as the starting quarterback. Now, it's impossible to ignore the fact that, well, I shouldn't say the fact, it's impossible to ignore the reports we heard throughout spring camp that Eli Holstein wasn't having a great camp. Some of that may be due to him continuing to recover from injury, which was, pretty commonly uttered sentiment, from talking to different sources and people who were watching practice, that he wasn't having a great spring, but he was also still recovering from the injury. So you don't 100%, assume that he's, just playing poorly or something like that. If he's dealing with an injury, he's dealing with an injury. But concurrent with hearing all these things about Eli Holstein not practicing well in spring camp and maybe still being hurt, we also were hearing a lot of good things about Mason Heinschel and how he was playing in spring camp and how he had done as a true freshman coming in. And so it's not hard. I don't think you need to be really controversy-minded or looking for conspiracy theories or looking for controversy. Just sort of put a couple of things together here and say, sort of sounds like maybe this quarterback competition is a little bit more open heading into training camp than you might have suspected. Now, I didn't need ACC Media Day, and you shouldn't have needed ACC Media Day to think that was a possibility, that Eli Holstein could be fighting for the job in August. Everything we heard out of spring camp indicated that might be the case, that the coaches were very much open to a competition. Even if they believed Holstein was still their number one guy, they weren't going to just shut down the competition. And if someone outplayed him, then that would be, the plans would be adjusted appropriately. It's just interesting to have that as sort of the narrative coming out of spring camp. And then you get this situation with ACC Media Day where he's not going. Now, this is to say nothing negative about the guys who are going. Pitt taking 2 offensive players and 2 defensive players. You'll get no argument from me about Desmond Reed and Lyndon Cooper as the offensive representatives. None whatsoever. Let's start at the top. If Pitt's taking players to ACC Media Day, to the ACC Football Kickoff, Desmond Reed and Kyle Lewis are the obvious guys that are going. They're the returning All-Americans. They're the most productive players on the team. They're the most well-known players on the team. When there are preseason All-ACC lists being released and preseason All-American lists being released, those are the 2 names that show up the most. So those guys were always going to Charlotte. It's just a question of who was going with them. And Lyndon Cooper is an interesting guy because I think Lyndon Cooper sort of quietly is the subject of some pretty high expectations this season. He, along with Rasheem Biles, is sort of that other name that's creeping into some of these preseason all-conference lists and preseason all-America lists and preseason watch lists and things like that. I think Lyndon Cooper was an asset to the offensive line last year. I think he made them better. I think when he was out, they suffered and took a step back. And I think the expectation is he'll be the anchor of the line again this year. And so it makes sense that they went with him. If they weren't going to go with the quarterback, if they weren't going to take Eli Holstein, it makes sense to take Lyndon Cooper. I get that. And then on defense, if you want to take two guys on defense, I think Javon McIntyre makes as much sense as anyone. He's a multi-year starter. He's a senior, a redshirt senior. If you want to take somebody else along with Kyle Lewis, that, I have no issue with McIntyre. I think he's probably a pretty good choice. What's interesting is the idea of sort of the face of the team. You know what I mean? The face of the program. I think right now Reed and Lewis are the two most prominent players. They're probably the players that are most likely to maybe get recognized. I think certainly their achievements and accomplishments are the most notable and most noticeable. And I think they probably get talked about the most. So I guess those guys are probably your faces of the team right now. But I wonder, there's always that sort of ongoing quest to get relevance and recognition and a foothold locally, to get the Pittsburgh sports fan interested in Pitt football, to get your average Pittsburgh sports fan to view Pitt football as a Pittsburgh sport. That there's the Pirates, there's the Steelers, there's the Penguins. You have the Pirates, that's your Major League Baseball team. The Steelers are your NFL team. The Penguins are your NHL team. And the Panthers are your college football team. And that's been a battle they've been fighting for a quarter century or more. Steve Peterson, I think one of the things he constantly tried to do was to engage the average Pittsburgh sports fan. And it's tough. It's a tough nut to crack. It's hard because you need to win consistently to keep them interested. You need to be relevant if you're Pitt. Because if you are not relevant, if you struggle, if you go 6-6, you have a losing season, the interest just immediately dissipates. You are constantly fighting to hold on to that interest from the local Pittsburgh sports fan. And, some of that's on Pat Narduzzi. The head coach has to be visible and recognizable and conduct some of that outreach. Some of that is on the university and the marketing team, the athletic department, and all of that. And some of that's on the individual players. Like, you need individual players who captivate the city. I think Kenny Pickett captivated the city to a certain extent. I think Larry Fitzgerald captivated the city. I think Aaron Donald captivated the city to some extent. Now, I mean, ticket sales weren't always crazy as a result of that, but I think those were individual players who did resonate beyond the Pitt fan base. So when you look at Pitt for this year, does Desmond Reed resonate beyond the Pitt fan base? Does Kyle Lewis resonate beyond the Pitt fan base? I'm pretty sure Lyndon Cooper and Javon McIntyre don't, just because they're not that prominent of players and they're not at that prominent of positions. But I wonder, does the average Pittsburgh sports fan know who Desmond Reed is? Do they know who Kyle Lewis is? They should. They should know who those guys are, but do they? And I don't know what the answer is to this. This is sort of me just sort of thinking out loud about the idea of, program recognition, team recognition, player recognition. And I think, when you look at something like ACC Media Day, you're looking at the guys that Pitt wants to push out there. Pitt wants those guys to be the face of the program. So they get featured on social media a lot. They go to ACC Media Day. They get that kind of publicity push. Does it resonate? I'm not sure. I think sometimes this is where having local players do well can come in and be a big part of it. Guys that maybe people are familiar with from high school. Although I don't think Pitt necessarily has that right now. I mean, you need like a big-time prominent guy. And Pitt's getting more of the Braylon Lovelace, Sean Fitzsimmons, guys who had great high school careers but aren't necessarily the most prominent players. I mean, go back to maybe like DeMar Hamlin and those kind of guys. You found some earlier on in the Narduzzi era, but not so much lately. But, it's all part of it. It's all part of that, creating that connection with the city and with the city sports fans. You need that individual recognition, individual standout performance. And Desmond Reed and Kyle Lewis are the most obvious options for it. I just wonder, if you have a friend, right? You're a Pitt fan, obviously that's why you're watching this, but you have some friends who are Pittsburgh sports fans. Ask them if they know who Desmond Reed is, or ask them if they knew who Kyle Lewis is. And I'm not like saying this like, go out, you'll see then, because I actually am genuinely curious. Like, do your Pittsburgh sports fan friends who are not Pitt alums and not Pitt fans, do they know who these guys are? If you said, do you know who Eli Holstein is? Do you know who Desmond Reed is? Do you know who Kyle Lewis is? I operate in such a bubble of Pitt fans, right? Like, I'm around Pitt fans all the time with the message boards and social media and all of that everybody I would interact with on this kind of topic, they know. But I wonder about, what's your experience with it of people outside of that bubble? I'm going to try and find people in the next couple of days and ask, you know who Kyle Lewis is? You know what Kyle Lewis did last year? Do you know who Desmond Reed is? Wonder what the response will be. Let me know what you find out here on the comments here or on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. I'm curious what you think. All right. And also let me know if you think there's a controversy with the ACC Media Day selection. I think it's curious. I have my own theories, some that I've shared, some that I haven't. But I think it's curious for sure. All right, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you never miss any of our Pitt video content. And check in on Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt coverage and stay tuned right here for all the Pitt video content. So thanks again for watching today. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope your week gets off to a great start. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.